Danny, we're going to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks. Have you ever played Big Buck Hunter?
No, have you?
No.
It's a great start.
Welcome to Dethroning the Warriors, a multi-part series where we talk about the big question lingering over these NBA playoffs. Who could take down the Golden State Warriors? That's Danny Chau.
That is Justin Verrier.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks, the actual best team in the NBA this season.
Asterisk. Regular season.
Okay, sure. 60 wins, best net rating, best defense, fourth best offense, and probably the MVP in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Let's start there with Giannis. We start every episode with how they were built. And obviously this is going to go back to probably the best draft pick in recent history. Giannis picked 15th overall in the 2013 NBA draft. Pretty much the front office there saw something they liked in that grainy footage against guys who were like running Euro carts down the street from the practice facility or whatever that was.
Right, there were a lot of pictures of him just with outstretched arms, and his arms were longer than the kids he was playing against.
Right.
It was ridiculous.
So here's a list of the guys that went before Giannis at 15. You have Anthony Bennett, the top pick in the draft. Cody Zeller went 4, which is pretty incredible. Great job, Michael Jordan. Alex Len, Nerlens Noel, Ben McLemore, KCP, Trey Burke, MCW, Kelly Olynyk, and probably my favorite, Shabazz Muhammad, one spot ahead. Can you imagine the Timberwolves if they had Giannis instead of Shabazz right now?
Oh,
what a
God.
team. What a team. Giannis drafted 15 overall. If he wins MVP this year, he's going to be the lowest drafted MVP other than Steve Nash, also a 15th overall pick, to do so in pretty much recent history. The only comps, Moses Malone in 82-83. He was picked in the 3rd round of the ABA draft.
That doesn't exist anymore.
It does not.
Neither of those things.
Willis Reed, who won in 70, he was picked in the 2nd round, and still there's a lot of noise in that just because of the way the league was going.
Right.
But the rest of the core is similarly freakish, if you will. Chris Middleton was pretty much a throw-in in the Brandon Knight trade. Eric Bledsoe, I mean, they traded for him. He is technically a known player, not really a star player though. It didn't seem like he had many options when he wanted out of Phoenix.
Right.
Malcolm Brogdon, 2nd round pick, obviously. Brook
Rookie of the
Lopez. Rookie of the technically, even though it should have gone to Embiid. Brook Lopez.
Or Sarge. I'm just a Sixers fan. You know?
Barely. Brook Lopez and Nikola Mirotic, another guy, good player, but he's been jumping around a little bit, not like these traditional big threes you're expecting. And really, they were a good team last year, not a great team, but they hired Mike Budenholzer to be the head coach last offseason, and he's really made sense of everything. Danny, how has this team been different under Budenholzer than they were under the kid Joe Prunty regime?
Oof. Okay, so first of all, I think we should give Jason Kidd at least a little bit of praise. He did see something in Giannis, turned him into a point guard his first year on the job, and that was basically the last thing he did to improve the team.
Right.
So basically, doing that was maybe the most revolutionary thing that's happened in the state of NBA positions over the past 5 years. But after that, it was a lot of, let's surround him with traditional big men who can get in his way. Let's really keep believing in Jabari Parker.
Right.
Who, Jabari Parker was a very talented scorer, but one of the big things that he was good at was like stalking the baseline and kind of making cuts and stuff like that. And it was basically just hogging up space for Giannis.
Right, Kidd was a progressive. I mean, he went small with the Nets before teams were really going small, but it almost like he got to the extreme with Giannis, and then just stopped, and then surrounded him with these plotters like John Henson.
Right, he was basically like, no one shoot threes, everyone just take mid-range shots, and it was like, you have one of the most futuristic teams on the planet. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
And so when you bring in a guy like Mike Budenholzer, who is a Spurs disciple, who showed the league during his days with the Hawks, he can build a team around spare parts, and have them play cohesively and have them have a very strong identity on the floor.
Yeah, that 2014-15 Hawks team won 60 games,
60 games
which is
as
a
well.
big benchmark. That's still how we kind of like decipher like elite teams.
Right. And so the big thing with Budenholzer was that he didn't just realize that Giannis was a revolutionary point guard, he realized that Giannis was a revolutionary center. And that kind of changed how the team was built. And so when you bring in a guy like Brook Lopez, for the longest time he was considered a traditional big man, back to the basket, soft touch, plotting, rim protector, whatever. He comes on the Bucks and suddenly this dude's taking step back threes, sidestep threes. He's basically playing like a guard, and the only reason why that's possible is because you have a guy like Giannis to fill this weird hybrid center wing point guard role that allows everyone else to kind of play to their strengths.
Yeah.
And so Brook Lopez, it has become a guard on one end and a traditional big man on the other end. It's almost like a mullet, you know, like traditional center in the front, partying Nick Young guard in the back.
Sure. Right? Yeah, I mean, you saw this with Anthony Davis last year where Nikola Mirotic goes in there. He kind of unleashes Davis on both ends of the floor. Obviously, now Mirotic, when healthy, is doing that for Giannis. But Brook was the guy who started it and has really unlocked everything for that team.
And one other thing, just to kind of tie it back to this team and how it's not just about Giannis. Chris Middleton is a guy who's also been kind of unlocked under Budenholzer. Traditionally a very, very good mid-range shooter who prefers to play in the post because of his size advantage. He's 6'8", 230 pounds pretty much. He's basically the size of a small ball 4 at this point. But for many years, it was like, you're one of the best three-point shooters in the league. Why are you taking these mid-range shots?
Right.
Suddenly now he's taking a career high in threes per game, and it's really helped basically open the floor for Giannis, and that's all the Bucks really need to do.
Right, and as we've seen, they went on to this banner regular season, 60 wins, led the NBA this year. So, but specifically against the Warriors this season, how have the Bucks performed?
I mean, they split the series, but that's kind of the thing with this arrangement. It's just the Bucks and the Warriors both played their 2 games, in 2018, November and December, just like the Raptors. So basically what we're looking at is 2 teams that haven't really seen each other at their best or, at their current capacity.
Right.
So, for example, in these 2 games, Draymond was injured for both of them. And so we didn't get to see Draymond on either of these games, and we didn't get to see his impact. But going forward, should they meet in the playoffs, should they meet in the finals, I think the Bucks have a sort of blueprint in terms of how they can actually play while Draymond's on the floor. Because Draymond being a kind of offensive liability in the sense that he can't shoot threes and he can't really create his own shot, there are mirrors to that in the 4 games that the Sixers and the Bucks played. Giannis defended Ben Simmons for most of those games. I think he averaged, according to NBA.com, he averaged 57 possessions as Ben Simmons' primary defender. And so basically what he was doing when he was on Simmons was freelancing.
Yeah.
He was playing that kind of free safety role, hiding himself like closer along the baseline so that he can basically make plays around the rim despite not actually having a presence around in the paint.
There's obviously a lot that the Bucks can expose there, but I do think there are some kind of weak spots on the other end of the court there, and that's actually something I want to get into here. My Achilles heel for the Bucks team overall, though, is the human body. As we've seen, the Bucks are a collective. They've really done, it took a whole community, essentially, to unlock Giannis, to bring him to his best, like you mentioned, allowing him to kind of be his best self and freelance and all this other stuff. But toward the end of the season, the body started to go down. Malcolm Brogdon, he might be out until May, although it seems like he's back on the court doing some things. And then everybody else, it seems like some of those shooters that they've surrounded Giannis with. Nikola Mirotic had a fractured thumb. Sterling Brown hurt his wrist. Tony Snell sprained his ankle. Dante DiVincenzo doesn't seem like he's going to be back for the rest of the season. And even Giannis missed 5 games down the stretch. It doesn't seem like much because none of these guys are really big parts of their core. Even Brogdon, maybe like a 5th option, 4th option on offense when they're doing their thing. But they need all of these guys because just bombing away was such a big part of what they do, and that's what I'm worried about going into this playoffs, because if you're going to load up on Giannis and force everybody else to beat you, who are those guys that are going to step up? Eric Bledsoe last year, a big old stinker in round 1 of the playoffs against the Boston Celtics. Chris Middleton, you're a big fan.
I'm a big fan, and to flip it, Bledsoe had a terrible playoff series against the Celtics. Middleton was destroying the Celtics in that 7-game series.
Shot almost 60% from the floor and maybe even from 3.
Yeah.
He was just incredible. But I do have questions about whether or not he could handle the scoring burden if Giannis is taken away, or as close to taken away as you can be.
Sure.
And then Brook Lopez.
That's
he's been so big for this team, but he's a big old log out there, especially on defense. And you wonder if certain teams can game plan against him. I think he's more susceptible in pick and rolls, against a pick and roll offense. I think the Celtics, in particular, if they get their stuff together in this round 1 and they play the Bucks in the second round, I think Al Horford's a terrible matchup for Brook Lopez, because if you get him out in space and picking and popping, and then Brook is always having to, it takes him 5 seconds just to make it out to the 3-point line.
Yeah, I think the big thing with Brook, and the big thing about how we generally gauge regular season versus playoffs as a whole, is just that during the regular season, it's not necessarily about game planning, it's not necessarily about matchups, it's just, you're just playing the game and you're just trying to get enough data about your players as possible. But once you get into the playoffs, everything starts condensing, everything starts becoming so minute in the details that, look, Brook Lopez against 25 other teams in the league can do exactly what he's been doing, can shoot the 3, can drop back in pick and rolls, drop back in all sorts of coverages, and just wall off the paint.
Yeah.
But the higher competition you get, the more you're going to get exploited, and Brook Lopez just does not have the foot speed to contend against any of the bigs on the Warriors.
Yeah, you're starting to see a lot of zone defenses across the NBA. The Nets use it a lot. The Heat in particular use it, but toward the end of the season, you started seeing it more against the Bucks. And I think that's because they like to play at pace, that 5th fastest team in the NBA this season, and all about disrupting their rhythm.
Right.
One of the big keys to their offense and what they do is Giannis being able to dominate in the paint, but not just do it as like a post-up big man like he's in the triangle. He could basically go from the top of the court
and just
downhill. Run downhill like he's a running back and just jam it down your throat. And that seems simple enough, but that's a huge thing. It's just easy points that they're getting. And so you see zone. I wonder what's going to happen if teams go small against them. If Mirotic is healthy, that might help a little bit. But if we're saying Brook Lopez is a key to what they're doing, is essential to what they're doing, I don't know how much you can count on him, especially against a team like the Warriors, who's probably the best in the NBA, going small still.
And this is where the Bucks, if they can get enough of these guys back, have the bodies to play an even more unconventional lineups, with Giannis as a pure 5 instead of being this kind of hybridized 3-4-5 guy. You still have the perimeter shooting, but it would require guys like Middleton to step up and play the 4.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's probably why they went out and got Mirotic, give up all those second-round picks to maybe fill that void. So there is some hope there. But you, in particular, like it when they go simple, when it's just Giannis and Middleton going to work. Take us through a play where they really showed what they can do.
Yeah, and talking about Giannis as this more traditional 5, it's something that he can actually do. He does so much on both ends of the floor that you forget that he can be, an amazing rim runner.
Yeah.
And so, surprisingly, when you look at the numbers, he actually doesn't have a lot of possessions end with him as the roll man in a pick and roll. You would think, he's so athletic, he can basically jump over anyone. There would be more, but it only accounts for about 5% of his total allocation of possessions.
Yeah, a lot of unassisted dunks.
Right.
Is basically what Giannis does.
It's basically a lot of, he's the trailer on the break, someone will scoop it over to him, and he'll just take it all the way down, just cram it down the gullet of the defense. But when he is in these pick and roll possessions, and he is as the roll man, he's scoring 1.4 points per possession, which is in the 95th percentile of all qualifying players, which is extremely good. Extremely good. So against the best, I think the Bucks will have to kind of continue ramping up the usage in that specific play type, because you're basically simplifying the game by putting your 2 best players in the best position possible. And so this play, basically what's happening is Sterling Brown and Brook Lopez are camped out in the corners, so that spreads out the floor, and the ball swings from Middleton to Eric Bledsoe, back to Middleton, kind of a little bit of a misdirection. They get right into a pick and roll with Giannis, who basically nails Bojan Bogdanovic, and then kind of just pins him to his back. And so they get the switch. Thaddeus Young obviously has to account for Middleton, but that means the paint is completely left wide open, and there's nothing you can do about that. Like, when the paint is that wide open, the entire objective is to get Giannis the ball in that space, because he can cover so much ground so quickly, and that's exactly what happens.
It's a simple play, but it just has a little modern twist to the start of it, basically.
Right, yeah, like, will it be that simple against the Warriors? No, because they have all of the horses to be able to, you know, switch any kind of pick and roll.
Yeah.
But the reason why I'm like, hey, we should see more Chris Middleton, Giannis pick and rolls is because they're the two most dynamic players on the team. And when you have two guys who are both 6'8" and taller, one of them is an elite isolation and pick and roll player, Chris Middleton. He can shoot from anywhere on the floor. He's one of their best ball handlers. And you have Giannis, who no one can guard one-on-one. You're increasing your margin for error. And that's the only thing you can really do against the Warriors, even if they do have guys like Durant and Draymond who could sniff all of that out. You're basically asking your two best players to carry you home.
Yeah, and I do wonder if the Warriors are the type of team that might go zone against them, because then you're forcing Giannis into the defense, and for him to kick out to open shooters. Now, he could do that very effectively, especially for a player of his size, but is Middleton like the perfect, you know, knockdown, catch and shoot three-point shooter? He's good. But Bledsoe, not so much. So there are some holes there, and I think that gets into some of the wing depth. Now let's go to our last segment here. We do this every time. It's our Warriors scale. How worried the Warriors should be about this team based on a scale from 1 to 10. 10 being the most worried, 1 being, I don't know, like, you know, a couple of grandmas on the court. I don't know.
Wow.
Danny, how worried are you? Or how worried should the Warriors be?
I'm always worried, but for the Warriors, I would say, look, I think it's still a 7.
A 7? Okay.
The thing about playoff series is, if you have the best player on the floor, then you should have some semblance of confidence. Giannis might not be it, but he's definitely right up there. And I think the Bucks can be confident in knowing that they have a fighting shot. Brook Lopez is not going to be a major factor in this. I don't think he needs to be.
So you're putting a lot of stock in like Mirotic and some of these other guys that they've gotten us around.
I'm putting a lot of stock in Giannis, honestly.
It's fair. I mean, he's pretty good. He's probably the MVP and maybe even Defensive Player of the Year. I'm not as optimistic. I'm at like a 4.5.
Ooh.
I actually think this is a bad matchup for the Bucks in particular. I just think that the Warriors have so many horses, and like if you're counting on Middleton to run his second unit or something, and it's basically Middleton against like a Kevin Durant or a Steph Curry, there's just not enough to make up for those non-Giannis minutes. They can overload Giannis, but I just think there are easy ways to kind of take the Bucks out. I'm actually curious if the Bucks even make it to the finals.
It's interesting though, because if we think about it, Giannis hasn't won a playoff series yet, and so going forward, how much does fatigue, how much does, you know, the extra minutes, the extra games kind of weigh on, you know, one of the most impressive physical specimens the game has ever seen.
Yeah.
You know?
All right, that's it for Dethroning the Warriors on the Milwaukee Bucks. For Danny, I am Justin. Subscribe to all those various things on YouTube, and tell us which team you want to see us do next. We're gonna do a few more of these. You know, write in the comments. Hit us up on the Twitters, on Instagram. We'll see you next time.